you might have noticed the goings-on in Parliament last night. Sir Keir Starmer, he suffered the biggest rebellion of his leadership last night as 10 Labour frontbenchers, 8 of them very key roles, of course, defined him of revert for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. 56 Labour MPs, of course, voted in favour of that, pretty much a quarter of the MPs that he has. Now, you've written a variety of books, actually, but one in particular as well about Labour being in opposition and all the rest of it. Never mind being in opposition, but actually going forward, potentially to being in government, perhaps by a slim majority, which is what a lot of people are predicting. What do you think, if anything, the result last night shows? Do you think that Keir Starmer's got a good handle on his MPs? Do you think we could potentially see rebellion going forward?
I think it shows that a lot of Labour MPs have no experience of government. They're not used to being put in uncomfortable positions, taking tough decisions that may be unpopular with the public, but an agreed party line. And I think Keir Starmer, I've had my criticism of Keir Starmer, but I think he's shown leadership actually on this issue. And I think he was absolutely right to say, if you can't back our position on this, then you're out of the front bench.
And was you surprised by the number, so the 56 number and then the 8 of the top roles? Did that number surprise you? Did you expect it to be more or less?
Well, actually, I mean, of the 8, I mean, there weren't the sort of the really heavy weights in the shadow cabinet leaving. I mean,
Jess Phillips was probably the highest profile.
She was the most prominent, and she wasn't even a senior shadow cabinet figure. So actually, if you know, someone like David Lammy or Wes Streeting or someone like that had resigned, I think that could have been much more destabilising for Starmer. What we're seeing really is a lot of Labour MPs don't like getting a high volume of emails and tweets and everything else, criticising them in such strong terms. The reality is they've got to toughen up. If Labour's going to go into government, they've got to be prepared to face a whole raft of different issues where they won't have the comfort of opposition to just oppose. They will actually have to take responsibility for the decisions they're making.
Well, yeah, and public life, I mean, you'll know yourself, public life is not an easy place to be because people will not be backwards in coming forwards and telling you what they expect of you, what they want you to do and all the rest of it. And is it, therefore, a fine line to tread between, you know, being a delegate or a representative, towing the party line, or backing and representing the people in your constituency?
Well, it is a fine line to tread. I just think with Starmer, you know, he had a very good conference in Liverpool. It's only a month ago since he had a very, very good conference in Liverpool, and I gave him credit for that at the time on the show. And it's really interesting to see how so quickly the fragility of the Labour coalition has been exposed by this issue that's come out of nowhere. Nobody could have expected this Hamas attack. No. And it's really blown up the Labour Party in a way that shows that a lot of that stuff at Liverpool really was show. Now, the really interesting question is, does it finish Starmer now? Clearly not. I mean, he's not finished now. He's still the leader and he will be the leader. But the really interesting question for government, I think, is how he treats the people who have left, because there's talk about, you know, finding ways of letting them back into the shadow cabinet for the election. That would be absolutely fatal to a Labour government. There has to be a cost to rebelling against the whip, and it has to be visible. And what it means is, and previous prime ministers have understood this, if you stay out, you're out and you stay out. And that's the only way of keeping the others in. Because Boris made this mistake. If there's no cost to rebelling against the whip, it'll happen all the time.
I'm just going to bring up on screen, in case you're not familiar with some of the people who we are talking about, just to show you some of those people who did rebel there. I've got to say, I don't mean to be rude, but not massive names, really. You'll be familiar, perhaps, with Naz Shah, of course, Jess Phillips. Do you know some of the others, everybody at home? Paula Barker, Rachel Hopkins, Asaf Khan, Sarah Owen, Andy Slaughter as well. One of the things I find interesting is out of the 10 people that resigned, 4 of them, I think it was, had resigned previously over the, was it Spy Cops situation? And to your point about, you know, if you're out, whether that's by choice or by being shoved, should you be able to then literally, I don't know, give or take a few months or whatever, be straight back in again?
Well, rebels, the political science literature shows that once someone rebels once, then they will rebel again. It becomes a habit forming. And so if you're an effective leader, you do want to try and nip that in the bud. And one way to do that is to demonstrate that there are real penalties for doing that. One of the problems I think Keir Starmer might have, at the moment at least, is that the talent pool on the PLP is relatively shallow. And so he has, yes, removed some people from the front bench and then they've had to come back. But part of that is because of a capacity issue. Now, if after the next election there are many more Labour MPs, and perhaps there will be some newly elected MPs who are, of interesting backgrounds and talent and skill, then he has to spend some time cultivating them, yes, but he might be able to boost his ranks. But at the moment, if you talk to people who are close to the PLP, they sort of say, particularly the 2015, 17, 19 intakes, there are exceptions to this, of course. There are a lot of MPs who aren't particularly impressive, and that limits the kinds of people that he can have on his front bench team.
Yeah, I find this quite interesting as well. So say, like, there's been a lot of conversations. There was a resignation letter that I read a few days ago. It actually stopped me in my tracks, so it did. So this is a councillor. So he's called Keir Hussain. You might be familiar with the story. He represented Walsall near Birmingham. His first line was that, I'm resigning from the Labour Party with immediate effect. The Labour Party has now become a place that is not safe for anyone with Muslim beliefs or anyone who supports the oppressed. He then goes on to say things like the Muslim community is being played by the Labour Party and so on and so forth. Of course, Jess Phillips, she represents a big constituency that is heavily Muslim. What do you think to this?
Well, I think this is a pattern that you've seen throughout the history of immigration into the UK. If you go back to my parents' generation coming here from Ireland, the Irish people who came over in that generation all voted solidly for Labour because Labour was the party that appeared to welcome immigrants and the Tories appeared to be hostile to immigrants. But what happens is you go through second and third generations and that all starts to dissipate and it splits away. Now, with the Muslim community, inevitably there'll be a degree of that splitting away happening just on historical grounds. It awaits an issue to revoke it, and Gaza is the issue. Now, the real interest, I think, is a slightly different question, is how comfortable are we as a country with people with such very strong views that we can't share? But as far as the Labour Party is concerned, they should have seen this coming because it was going to happen anyway through intergenerational change.
Yeah, do you know, I've got to say, did you want to come in very briefly?
Well, I'd just say, I mean, one interesting side note to this is that 100 years ago, it was Jewish immigrants who came into the Labour Party and were very, very pro-Labour. And in the 1960s and 1970s, over 10% of the Parliamentary Labour Party were Jewish MPs. In the last election, just 5 Jewish people were elected as Labour MPs. But that reflects the way in which that community has now changed, and that was a much more working class, poorer community when they arrived, and now much more integrated into British society and so on. So, you see these differences.
Well, Andrew, one of my viewers, says, hats off to Keir for sticking to his guns. Many people, I mean, Dave just says, basically, we're just witnessing the death of the main parties. They're both now too divided to continue, he says. Do you agree with that?